How many times have you tried to be strong and ended up breaking inside just to prove it to someone else? The truth no one told you is this: what hurts the most isn't always what they do to you. It's what you allow, trying to be accepted, understood, or loved. And that's where Stoicism hits like a mirror. It shows you that it's not silence that breaks you. It's the effort to be heard by someone who refuses to listen. It's not absence. It's the weight of trying too hard. This video will show you what others don't dare say, that disappearing peacefully might be the beginning of your freedom. You'll learn how to stop reacting, how to break toxic emotional cycles, how to protect your mind from those who feed off your pain. You'll realize that silence can become presence, that absence can become respect, and that you can be reborn without explaining yourself to anyone. This isn't just another motivational speech. It's clear, powerful, ancient wisdom that transforms. If you're going through a moment of silent pain or emotional struggle that no one sees, this channel is for you. Every video here will help you use Stoicism to protect yourself. Stay calm under pressure, control anger, master your mind, and build an inner peace that no one can take away. So subscribe now, turn on the notifications, and share this with someone who needs it. Because the next video you miss might be the one that sets you free. You know that moment when you try so hard to explain yourself, it feels like you're begging to be understood? Yeah. What many don't realize is that this constant need to justify everything is what drains you the most. Stoic philosophy, with its ancient wisdom, shows us that silence can be a real shield against the ego's need for approval. Marcus Aurelius used to say that external noise only affects us when there's turmoil inside. And maybe your biggest challenge today is to quiet the inside, so you no longer need to scream on the outside. Have you noticed that the more you try to be understood by someone who doesn't want to listen, the more exhausted you feel? And that's not weakness. It's a clear sign that you're investing your energy in the wrong place. Stoicism invites us to face this with clarity and make a choice. Either you wear yourself out trying to convince, or you strengthen yourself by practicing emotional control and self-discipline. Sometimes the wisest answer is no answer at all. Silence in this case is power. Many confuse silence with passivity, but Stoic philosophy teaches us that being silent can be the highest form of mental strength. It's not about shutting up out of fear. It's about consciously choosing where your energy will go. If someone tries to provoke or manipulate you, silence disarms them. It's like saying, "I'm not your emotional toy. My mind's mastery is stronger than your attempt to throw me off." Picture this. Someone tries to provoke you expecting a reaction, but you take a deep breath, look them in the eyes, and say nothing. That, my friend, is not weakness. It's Stoic wisdom in motion. Seneca would call this unshakable inner peace. And you know what happens? The person who expected your explosion gets confused. They were counting on your predictability. When you break the script, the power shifts, and you begin to reclaim yourself. Here's a practical exercise. Next time you feel the urge to justify yourself to someone who's already judged you, stop. Take a deep breath. Ask yourself, am I doing this out of a need for validation or out of fear of rejection? Write it down if you need to. This helps you train perception, and that's the real power of Stoic philosophy, learning how not to be shaken by external noise, and of course how to stay calm under pressure. If you've ever felt the sting of being misunderstood, of being rejected yet still trying to explain, drop a comment. My silence is my shield. Let's see how many of us have realized that what breaks us inside isn't the silence, but the effort to be understood by someone who refuses to hear us. Because sometimes silence is just the beginning of something much bigger that's yet to come. Sometimes the greatest proof of mental strength isn't holding on, it's knowing when to walk away. But not just any exit, the kind that comes from the clarity that staying is what's breaking you. Stoic philosophy is clear about this. Staying where you're not valued is like watering a dead plant, hoping it will bloom. Marcus Aurelius would remind you that life is too short to waste in places where there is no reciprocity. Walking away may be the first step back to your inner peace. Emotionally intelligent people know that not every presence is worth it. They master perception and understand that many times, absence says what presence has already said 1,000 times. Withdrawing from a toxic environment, a draining relationship, or a pattern that exhausts you is not cowardice, it's strategy. And that strategy has a name: self-discipline. Knowing when to stop is just as powerful as knowing when to persist. Have you ever noticed how the best answer is sometimes to disappear? To leave without drama, without a speech, without a note on the door, because the explanation would only be another energy leak that never returns. That's not coldness like many think. It's clarity. It's having the mastery of mind to no longer respond as before. It's making silence your greatest statement. And those expecting drama? They get the void. And in that void, discomfort starts speaking. Here's a practical example. Think of a repetitive argument with someone who always twists your words. Instead of preparing another emotional defense, withdraw. Let the silence speak for you. That breaks the cycle. That disrupts the pattern. That activates what the Stoics call inner freedom. You're no longer a prisoner of someone else's behavior. You begin to live aligned with your own center. Emotional resilience here isn't about enduring someone else's chaos. It's recognizing that it's not worth drowning trying to save someone who's pulling you under. And the strangest part? When you vanish, they lose their script. They were counting on your reaction, your predictability. And now the one losing the game isn't you. That's the game of the ego, keeping you locked in the cycle of proving. But you can exit that game without warning. If you've ever felt this liberation, if you've walked away in silence from somewhere that only used you, drop a comment. I'm not running, I'm protecting myself. Because protecting your peace is not running away. It's emotional intelligence in action. It's a Stoic lesson few truly master, but one that opens the door to a new kind of presence, stronger than any you've had before. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to know exactly which button to push in you? That's not coincidence, it's habit. A habit you yourself created by always reacting the same way. Stoic philosophy reveals that emotional control begins the moment you stop being predictable. When you break that pattern, they lose their grip, and power begins to shift. Epictetus would say, "It's not events that disturb us, but how we interpret them." How many times have you tried to fix a misunderstanding, explaining yourself until you lost your temper, and the other person seemed to enjoy your reaction? That's because their ego feeds on your instability. But when you go quiet, breathe, and simply observe, something changes. They're no longer getting the emotional feedback they depended on. The game changes when you stop playing. And the one who loses control is them. Here's a practical tip to train this. Next time someone provokes you, instead of reacting, close your eyes for 3 seconds. Breathe. Notice what you're feeling. Then tell yourself, this emotion doesn't define me. That's how you activate emotional intelligence and weaken the impulse. That's how you learn to control anger and stay calm under pressure. Silence, in this case, becomes a sharp tool, capable of ending cycles without saying a word. Marcus Aurelius dealt with criticism without raising his voice. He looked past the words to see the hidden intent and chose not to engage with ego games. You can do the same. Sometimes the true victory isn't winning the argument, but refusing to let it knock you off balance. That's where real mental strength lives. You don't have to prove yourself to someone already committed to misunderstanding you. Just stay grounded in your mind's mastery. And here's the twist. When you stop reacting, the other person starts reacting to your silence. They try to provoke you again, pull the same tricks, but you don't respond. That creates more confusion than any shouted argument. Stoic philosophy calls this the break in the emotional feedback loop. You're no longer food for someone else's ego. You've become the quiet space they don't know how to fill. If that's ever happened to you, if you've noticed that by stopping your reaction the other person lost control, comment, "I changed the script." Let's see how many of us have made this silent decision to step out of the role others expected us to play. Because when you refuse to act, the play ends. There's something deeply uncomfortable about facing your own reflection, especially when that reflection comes from someone's silence. Stoicism teaches that silence doesn't just protect, it reveals. When you stop speaking, you're not giving up on the conversation. You're handing over a mirror that reflects the other person's behavior without filters, fluff, or defense. And that's when many feel exposed. Because for the first time, there's no distraction, only truth. Imagine a relationship where you always tried to fix things through conversation. But one day, you simply decided to observe. You stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped chasing, and the other person, used to your constant effort, starts to feel unsettled, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Your silence becomes a harsh mirror, showing them how much they relied on your willingness to fix everything. In that lack of explanation, discomfort grows, because now the responsibility for what happened can't be thrown back at you. You're no longer the emotional buffer. This is a key point in Stoic emotional control and life philosophy. When you emotionally detach, the other person is forced, for the first time, to deal with the mess they created. Without your effort to keep it all standing, things begin to collapse. Seneca said that silence is an argument hard to refute, and that's exactly what happens when you stop explaining and start observing. The other person begins to wonder, did I go too far? Not out of guilt, but because the absence begins to echo. Your absence, the one that used to be filled with words, now exposes with quiet. And that silence, it stings, but it's also necessary. It forces a kind of self-confrontation. Want to apply this? Next time someone unfairly blames you for something, don't fight back. Simply say, I understand your point. Then, silence. Let them reflect on their own words. This isn't manipulation. It's emotional intelligence and resilience training. You're not being cold, you're being clear. And clarity, my friend, can hit harder than any prepared response. If you've experienced this, if your absence became an uncomfortable mirror for someone, comment, I am the mirror now, and stay with me. Because this mirror still has much to show. Especially when it comes to the pain of over-explaining. Over-explaining is like tearing your soul into little pieces, hoping someone else will put it back together. But Stoicism warns us, the more you try to justify yourself to someone who isn't listening, the more of yourself you lose. Seneca would say the soul wears out in the effort to please closed minds. And maybe the pain you feel today doesn't come from what they did to you, but from how much you tried to be understood by someone who never wanted to understand. How many times have you walked away from a conversation feeling voiceless, even after saying so much? This is one of the cruelest paradoxes of trying to please. You talk, you try, you give it your all, and still end up misunderstood. Stoic philosophy points out that your value isn't in being understood by everyone, but in staying calm before those who aren't ready to hear you. That's self-discipline, that's mind mastery, and that's freedom. Here's a powerful tip. When you feel yourself spiraling into self-justification, write it down. Instead of speaking, document your thoughts. It helps you gain clarity and strengthens your perception. You'll notice that many of the things you wanted to say didn't really need to be said. Sometimes the best response is a step back. How to control anger. Stop trying to convince those who aren't growing with you. There's a silent kind of pain, one that doesn't bleed but eats away at you. The pain of molding yourself just to fit in someone else's space. And when this pain piles up, it turns into resentment. Stoic philosophy teaches us that resentment is wasted life energy. You're not here to adapt to someone's neglect. You're here to grow in the direction of inner peace. And that peace begins the moment you stop explaining yourself to someone unwilling to listen. Marcus Aurelius wrote down his thoughts precisely to avoid the trap of saying too much. He understood that not everything needs to be said, especially to those who don't value your truth. So let me ask you, have you been wisely choosing who deserves your voice? That's personal development. That's mental strength. Because what's been breaking you may not be someone else's silence, but your own noise trying to fill their emptiness. If you've felt this pain, if you've realized that explaining too much only drains you, comment, I chose to stop explaining myself. Because sometimes silence is the healing your mind's been begging for, and it's also the beginning of breaking a deeper cycle, which we'll talk about next. Sometimes what drains you isn't what the person does, but what you allow again and again. Stoicism teaches that much of our suffering comes from the repetition of unconscious patterns. You give, expect something in return, get frustrated, and then start the cycle all over again. Stoic philosophy calls for awareness. If the other person doesn't change, maybe it's time to change your response. How to stay calm under pressure? By recognizing when the game repeats itself and choosing not to play anymore. Seneca said the mind must be trained not to repeat its own mistakes. And what if what breaks you inside isn't a single big trauma, but small daily betrayals you allow? A yes when you meant no, a reply you send knowing you shouldn't, a forced forgiveness just to avoid conflict. All of that fuels a cycle that traps you, and no one breaks a cycle without becoming aware of it first. Want a practical exercise? For the next 7 days, write down every time you feel like you're giving in when you shouldn't. Then review and spot the pattern. You might realize that guilt always makes you say yes, or that rejection makes you overgive. That's Stoic self-knowledge in motion. And when you see the cycle, you can break it. Perception becomes your secret weapon in this quiet war. Marcus Aurelius reflected daily on his own habits, precisely so he wouldn't live on autopilot. You can do the same. Once you identify the pattern, change just one small action. If you always respond instantly, wait. If you always explain, pause. That tiny act of resistance is the beginning of your mind mastery. That's where true emotional control begins, and where the other person starts realizing the script is no longer working. You know what happens when you stop feeding the cycle? It weakens. The other person gets confused, pushes harder, tries the same old triggers. But if you stay grounded, something breaks. And it's not you, it's the structure that held you captive. Stoic life philosophy isn't about defeating others. It's about defeating the patterns that are destroying you. Because sometimes, what's breaking you isn't the pain itself. It's the repetition of a pain you've normalized. If this resonated with you, comment, "I'm breaking the cycle." That simple action might inspire someone stuck in the same loop you just stepped out of. Because when you break a cycle, you don't just free yourself, then you open space to become someone new. And that new you begins to understand that absence can carry more presence than any word. The irony of life is that people only truly feel your presence once you disappear. And Stoicism reveals this in a brutally honest way. Silence is selective presence. When you stop chasing, stop texting, stop trying to save what hurts you, the other person finally feels the weight of your absence. But it's not nostalgia, it's discomfort. Because the comfort you once gave has now become silence, and that silence hits hard. Remember that person who only seemed to value you when you were about to leave. It's because they never had to face the reality that you might actually go. But when you do, and without drama, without warning, without passive-aggressive hints, it creates an impact that no argument ever could. Stoic philosophy teaches that absence has more power when it isn't wrapped in guilt. You don't disappear to hurt, you disappear to heal, and that changes everything. Here's a practical example. Think of someone who only reaches out when they need something. Next time, don't reply right away, don't drop everything, don't explain, just go quiet and watch. That silence creates tension. The other person starts realizing that something's changed, and it's not that you've become cold, it's that you've finally put yourself first. That's one of the most powerful ways to maintain your calm without losing your position. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Those who live in harmony with nature don't live to please others." Your absence becomes natural once you understand that preservation is a virtue. And those who relied on your constant effort and presence feel a seismic shift when you no longer show up. Absence becomes a loud message. I'm no longer available to those who don't value me. And that shakes even the most confident egos. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach you to withdraw out of pride. It teaches you to withdraw out of self-care. If you're always seeking validation, you forget that sometimes the way to earn respect is by walking away. And that space you create, that's absence. Use it wisely. Make it your strength. Because when you're no longer emotionally available, the other person is forced to reposition themselves. And most of the time, they have no idea how. If you've already noticed that kind of power, if you've felt your absence speak louder than your words, comment, "My absence has a voice." Because in that absence, the real rebirth begins. Silent, firm, stoic. And in the next step of this journey, you'll discover how silence can mark the exact point where everything starts again. When pain turns into decision, a new kind of silence is born, the most powerful of all, the silence of rebirth. Stoicism doesn't teach revenge, it teaches transcendence. And when you rebuild yourself in silence, without needing to prove anything to anyone, you tap into a new type of strength. It's no longer the strength that pleads or explains, it's the strength of someone who learned that true power is in moving forward, quietly, without an audience. Have you noticed how the biggest transformations often happen in silence, like a wound that heals away from everyone's eyes? That's where ancient wisdom comes to life. Seneca would call this emotional maturity, the kind that doesn't need applause for internal change, because what transforms you deeply doesn't need to be announced. And when you're reborn on the inside, the world outside senses it. Even if no one says anything, something has shifted, and it's irreversible. Here's a powerful practice. Take time for yourself. No announcements, no explanations. Turn off your notifications. Silence the people who drain you. Read Marcus Aurelius. Meditate for 5 minutes a day. That's self-development. No need to post it. No need to talk about it. Just do it. Because this kind of change screams in silence. And little by little you realize, you don't react the same anymore. You don't need validation like before. This kind of rebirth is invisible to the eye, but it changes everything. What once hurt you now teaches you. What once paralyzed you now moves you. What once silenced you now strengthens you. That's mind mastery at full power. And it no longer matters whether others notice or not. You know, you feel it, you're different, and best of all, you no longer need to shout it. Your silence carries your new signature. Epictetus said that no one is truly free until they learn to govern themselves. And that's exactly what you're doing. When you choose to grow without needing praise, you enter a stage where inner peace is worth more than any connection. What hurt you no longer defines you. What exposed you now protects you, and those who broke you might begin to notice. But it'll be too late, because who you've become no longer fits the space you once occupied. Now tell me, how many times have you tried to be heard when what you really needed was to be respected? How many times did you scream inside while no one noticed? Today, you've learned that silence also speaks, that disappearing peacefully might be the loudest message someone has ever given. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself. And that's the real power, to heal in silence, and let the other person learn from the echo of your absence. But none of this works unless you make a decision right now. Are you going to keep responding to everything? Keep explaining yourself to those who don't understand you? Or are you going to start protecting yourself emotionally, developing mental strength, and stop giving your energy to people who don't value it? The choice is yours. Silence can be an escape or a rebirth. It all depends on who you decide to become from here on. So leave a comment below. My silence rebuilds me. Write it to seal in what you've just learned. And if this content spoke to your soul, helped you or made you reflect, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Because sometimes one sentence changes everything. And if you want to keep learning how to grow stronger from within, protect yourself from the outside, and live with Stoic wisdom, subscribe now. Here you'll find more than just videos. You'll find direction, clarity, and real tools to grow in silence with emotional mastery and ancient wisdom. Turn on notifications and don't miss anything, because the next video might be the push you need to turn the page. And when that happens, though, you'll understand that silence didn't break you, it built you.